Thank you. All right, folks, good evening. Welcome to the Value Added Producer Grant Scholarship webinar hosted by Community Alliance with Family Farmers. My name is Grace, and we'll do some more formal introductions to speakers in just a moment. Hope you're all doing well today. If you are just joining us or have not yet introduced yourself in the chat, please add your name, where you're calling in from, the name of your farm or your food business, anything else that you would like to share with us to get a sense of who is in the Zoom room today. That would be lovely. Thank you. So we're going to be spending about the next 90 minutes, hour and a half together, talking about the Value Added Producer Grant, and also some opportunities through CAFF and Ellen Rawley Creative and Strategy to support farmers in applying for the Value Added Producer Grant. So in an effort to keep things moving along and background noise to a minimum, everyone should be muted upon entry here. And it looks like most folks are. If you're not, if you could go ahead and mute yourself, that way, you know, dogs barking in the background, which might happen to me, or whatever, wherever you're calling in from today, doesn't cause a lot of sound in the background, that would be great. We will have 20 to 30 minutes at the end for a question and answer. And so please try to hold your questions until then. We will be sending some resources through the chat. And so to hopefully prevent your questions from getting lost, I do ask for you to hold questions until the end and then start populating the chat. But if some questions come in before, then I might just ask for you to put them in the chat again. You can also add comments into the chat, and then we're recording this webinar and we'll send out a copy or the recording of it and a copy of this presentation, hopefully by the end of this week. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about Community Alliance with Family Farmers, also known as CAFF. We are the organization that's hosting this webinar today. And some of you might be very familiar with our work, and some of you, you might be joining CAFF for the first time. So we are a nonprofit organization based in California that really exists to support small to mid-scale size family farmers throughout the state. And we do this through a number of different programs, which are kind of illustrated at the bottom of this slide. We help farmers with food safety, compliance and certification, organic certification, small farm technology adoption, connecting farmers with markets or new markets or strengthening existing markets, helping farmers adopt ecological farming practices like integrated pest management practices on their farms, host lots of farmer to farmer field days to connect farmers with each other and share the knowledge that you have amongst community. We also have a policy and advocacy program, which really exists to connect farmers' voices to legislators and policymakers at the state level in Sacramento and also in Washington, D.C. And every year we host the California Small Farm Conference, which for the past several years, including this year, in late February, hosts a series of online workshops for a number of days and concludes with in-person regional gatherings all over the state in different regions, hosted by CAFF staff and other partners and farmers. The Small Farm Conference this year is the last week of February. It starts on Sunday, which I don't exactly know what day that is, and concludes on Wednesday with regional gatherings on Thursday and Friday. And encourage you to check out our website for more information about the conference. Lots of really wonderful speakers and opportunities to connect with folks through that. The agenda for today, we're really going to be kind of breaking things up into 4 different parts. I'm going to kick things off with getting into the details of the value added producer grant at the beginning. And then I'm going to pass it on to Liz Jones to talk about the business where she works, Rawley Creative and Strategy, and their value added producer grant writing services and their process. Then Kaylee Feiereisel is going to kind of wrap things up with the formal presentation and talk about the value added producer grant scholarship program that CAFF has been running for the past few years, which really seeks to connect farmers with grant writing services or other resources to support value added producer grants. And then we will conclude with a question and answer. In addition to providing resources and kind of showcasing the different opportunities that exist, we also want to provide some education around the value added producer grant as a program, regardless of if you choose to work with a grant writer or choose to do it yourself. That way you can kind of make a more informed decision about whether the program is a good fit for your farm right now, or maybe something to grow into the future. So I'll just give a little brief introduction, then ask Kaylee and Liz to wave hi. So we are your speakers for today. My name is Grace Perry. I work for CAFF, and I am the Farmer Services Regional Lead for the Central Valley region. I'm based in Sonora, so a little, into the foothills from the Central Valley, but I help farmers with food safety, organic certification, and value-added products. Kaylee Feiereisel is the Farmer Services Director at CAFF and really helps direct strategy for our program and make sure that the needs of our program are meeting farmers where they're at. And then Liz Jones is the Client Success and Operations Coordinator with Rawley Creative and Strategy, and does a lot of client interfacing along with Ellen in the variety of services that they offer to strengthen farmer-led businesses. So there's a lot that I'm leaving out there for Liz specifically, and Kaylee definitely, but hopefully if there's anything I missed, you guys can let folks know during your presentation. So I'm going to get into the details of the value added producer grant. As I said, some of this is going to be kind of jargony, so just and content heavy, but just asking for you all to stick with me. Hopefully there's some information in here that's going to resonate with you and be helpful for you to think about throughout the next couple of months before the value added producer grant is released. The value added producer grant is administered through the USDA. So it's a USDA program. It's been around for over 20 years. And it really exists to fund agricultural producers to create or expand their value added businesses, and has the distinct goals of expanding market opportunities and increasing producer income. The program is funded through the Farm Bill, and if you know much about the Farm Bill, some programs receive permanent mandatory funding and some of them have to be renewed each Farm Bill cycle. But this is one of the programs that receives permanent mandatory funding each year, but that amount does fluctuate. So there's no guarantee that the amount that was offered last year or was available last year will be available this year. And it is a pretty competitive program. In 2022, 342 eligible applicants requested more than $54 million, and 32 million of the awarded funds went to 197 applicants with the highest scores. We'll talk a little bit about, I guess, competitiveness in applications later on in the presentation. So I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about the types of projects that are eligible. I'll be using like the terms eligible and ineligible quite a bit in the presentation, but it is important that you evaluate your farm, your project, your value-added enterprise for eligibility, because that will determine whether or not you get a grant. So to start us off, commodity processing is kind of the most traditional sense of value-added processing in my mind. in which you can increase the value of a product or a commodity by changing the commodity's physical state. And an example of this would be a farm who processes cosmetically damaged sweet potatoes into dehydrated sweet potato dog treats and sells them direct to consumer through farmers markets and their CSA program. A commodity segregation project would increase commodity value by keeping the commodity separate or physically separated in production and distribution. So this could be a farmer cooperative that sells non-GMO feed into new markets. And maybe they have another GMO feed that's kind of a separate part of their business. There's also market differentiation projects, and these increase value by marketing the commodity's special identity or character. An example of this would be a farm who packages organically grown fresh herbs into branded and specially designed clamshells. So nothing really that changes the state or processing necessarily of the product. Local food projects increase value by marketing food for local markets. So an example of this would be a rancher pays for a professional study to determine the feasibility of expanding their processing of pork into bacon, sausage, and ham to market through a CSA program. This example kind of gets at the fact that there are two different types of value-added producer grants that someone could apply for, working capital and planning grants. And this would be an example of a planning grant. So something that's a farmer is applying to get funding for a type of study, a feasibility study, or a business plan, something like that. And then finally, the last two types of eligible products are on-farm renewable energy projects, which generate value by transforming natural resources into energy on the farmstead. And an example of this would be a dairy that sells carbon credits on the California Carbon Credit Exchange as a result of methane gas production that comes from their dairy biodigester. Or a mid-tier value chain project that increases value by linking farmers with local and regional supply networks in which they are equal partners. An example of this would be a farmer-led food hub processes quick frozen vegetable blends and then sells them into institutional markets. Here's another type of eligibility component to the grant. What type of entity are you that will be applying for a value-added producer grant? Overall, this grant is really geared towards supporting farmers, and we'll be able to see that through the mention of the phrase independent producer throughout many of these entities. So an independent producer is defined as farmers, ranchers, and harvesters, such as loggers and fishers. And these folks must be directly engaged in the day-to-day labor, management, and field operations of the agricultural commodity that is being, that a project is built around. Farmer or rancher cooperatives are businesses that are owned and controlled by independent producers. That is a cooperatively owned business. And a note here for some folks, this could be relevant, that agricultural harvesters are not eligible to apply as a farmer or rancher cooperative. The next type is an agricultural producer group, and this is a nonprofit membership organization that represents independent producers and operates with a mission that includes working on behalf of independent producers. For this type of applicant, the majority of the membership must meet the definition of an independent producer, and the majority of the applicant's board of directors must also meet the definition of independent producer. Then we have majority controlled producer-based businesses, and this is a type of business in which the entity with the majority, an entity in which the majority of the financial and voting interest belongs to independent producers. And then a steering committee is a group that's not yet incorporated, so not yet incorporated as one of the other applicant types, a cooperative, a producer group, a majority controlled producer-based business. This like gives them a category to apply through. There's a specific USDA definition for this. And so if you think that it fits, definitely encourage you to look at the definition to make sure that it is in alignment with what is happening. And then 100% of the group must be independent producers. Federally recognized tribes and tribal entities are also eligible to apply and must demonstrate that they meet the definition for one of the 4 eligible applicant types. And as with all of this, rural development state offices and application materials can provide additional information on eligibility. So getting to the different types of value-added producer grants, there are 2 different types. As I mentioned, there's the planning grant and then there's the working capital grant. So we'll start with the planning grant. Planning grants can be used to fund the development of business and marketing plans and feasibility studies needed to determine the viability of value-added products. The maximum award that someone could apply for is $75,000. And the project length must be no more than 3 years. We also have some tips based on our experience and knowledge of these grants that the representatives who are going through these grants and issuing them, funding them, expect the awards to actually be lower, so in the $15,000 to $25,000 range, and that they also have a preference for seeing planning grants that are a year or less. So each grant type has eligible expenses and ineligible expenses, and again, submitting a grant with ineligible expenses could hurt your chances or your application. So it is important to know and check the application materials when they come out what the eligible and ineligible expenses are. Eligible expenses for planning grants are conducting feasibility studies, developing business plans for processing and marketing your value-added product, paying a qualified consultant to conduct or develop a feasibility study, business plan, or marketing plan, and may also be used for recipe development. Ineligible expenses for planning grants include compensating applicants, so yourself, or family members for participation in feasibility studies. The next type of grant is a working capital grant. And this funding can be used for the operation of a value-added business venture, to pay for eligible project expenses that are related to processing, sales, distribution, and/or marketing of value-added products. The maximum award for working capital grants is $250,000, but grants over $50,000 must include a feasibility study, a business and/or a marketing plan with them. The project length, again, is no more than 3 years. And when the application is released, there will be 3 different types of working capital applications that you must select from and use to submit to the USDA. There's a simplified application, which is for grants that are under $50,000, and then 2 types for over $50,000, emerging market and market expansion, which just depends on the type of project that you're putting forth to the USDA. And we have a flow chart in this slide, that's linked in this slide, that can help you, once you get to that point, decide which application to go with. An important note here is that applicants are only eligible to apply for one planning or a working capital grant each grant cycle, and you can only have one active grant at a time. So you need to make sure that if you have an active grant, that grant closes out prior to maybe a new application or a new project beginning, if they're both funded through the Value Added Producer Grant Program. So there are lots of examples for eligible and ineligible expenses for working capital grants. This is definitely not an exhaustive list that I'm going to go over, but a common question that we've received in webinars and communication around this grant before is around what type of expenses can I pay for through this grant. So these are some examples. You can pay for administrative costs. An example could be designing or purchasing a financial accounting system. You can also pay for some processing and production costs. So you can pay for food safety certifications related directly to the processing of a value-added product. Distribution costs could be eligible. So an example of an eligible expense would be shipping fees for e-commerce purchases. And you can pay for some marketing and promotion costs. So an example of this would be signage that advertises your product. Another example of processing costs that are eligible would be working with a co-packer or costs associated with renting a commercial kitchen. A few more here. Some general operating expenses are eligible to be funded through this grant. So routine maintenance that keeps equipment in working condition. You could also purchase equipment or supplies that have a value of less than $5,000. You may be able to pay for some utility costs, like utility charges to run a processing facility. And you can also pay for some staff time. So you can pay salaries of employees that do not have ownership or immediate family interest to process, market, and or deliver the value-added product. And then some examples of ineligible expenses are any expenses associated with the production, agricultural production, harvesting, or commodity transportation. You cannot pay for the repair, acquisition, or construction of a building or facility. Unfortunately, the grant funds cannot be used to purchase, rent, or install equipment with a value of $5,000 or more. That's a very common question. And then in some recent years, you have been able to pay or use funding to pay for packaging and label design, but recently that's something that has become an ineligible expense. You cannot pay for branded merchandise, whether you resell it or give it away. And some certifications, like those related to the production of an agricultural commodity, like organic or GMO-free, are also ineligible. Another important component of the grant is that there is a matching funds requirement, which means that applicants must come up with matching funds that are equal to the funds being applied for. So applicants must contribute $1 for every dollar of funding that's received. And matching funds can come from cash or eligible in-kind contribution. And 50% of the match that the farmer contributes can be the value of their time working on the project. Matching funds must be secured when your application is submitted, and evidence of that must be submitted. And this past year, we're anticipating in 2024 that points will be awarded to applications that have a cash match contribution. So you can see here 0 to 4 points, depending on the cash match contribution, will be awarded to applications. And the applications are scored on a point-based system. So the more points that you have, the higher score that you have, the more likely you are to have an awarded application. So there is some advantage to having cash match. Just to illustrate the matching funds requirements, say that a farmer submits an application for a working capital grant to expand production of their preserved tomatoes and enter into new markets, and the applicant is applying for a working capital grant using the simplified application. As part of their application, they indicate where the matching funds, so the $49,000, are coming from. In this example, the farmer will contribute $24,500 in cash. And then the rest of the amount will come from their time, which is calculated using hourly rates for agricultural labor. I'm going to just kind of wrap things up with this slide here, some additional requirements and some tips for folks as they prepare to think about writing an application for the Value Added Producer Grant. Really what it comes down to is your application must demonstrate that your project adds value to the commodity, will expand your customer base, and increase revenue. The entity applying for the grant must grow at least 51% of the raw commodity needed for the project on their own farm. This is one that sometimes catches folks off guard. Applicants who already received a planning grant for the proposed project cannot receive another planning grant for the same project. And the same goes for working capital grants. Applicants who already received a working capital grant for the proposed project cannot receive any additional grants for that exact project. That's not to say that they can't receive that farm can't receive another value added producer grant, but it can't be for that exact same project. And as I stated before, if you already received and are working under a value added producer grant, your current grant must be closed out within 90 days of the application deadline to be eligible for the new round of funding. Okay, hopefully everyone's still hanging on here. I'm going to transfer the mic over to Liz, and she is going to talk about Ellen Rawley Creative and Strategies work with farmers in the Value Added Producer Grant.
Thank you, Grace. That's a lot of helpful information. And I hope that I can help translate it to application to get everybody's brains thinking about how it applies to them specifically. But first, I'll just mention, like Grace said, that I am the Client Success and Operations Coordinator for Ellen Rawley Creative and Strategy. That's just a really long title to say that I wear a lot of different hats. So I do some admin as well as project management, and being here today. Historically, this is something that Ellen does, but she's finishing up some maternity leave and will be back February 1st. But I'm stepping in for her today because she's still on leave. A little bit about us. We shortened our name to ERCS because it's easier to say multiple times in a row. So we're rooted in Petaluma, California, but I am branched off in Aurora, Colorado. So it's fun to be able to use technology to connect in this way. Our main goal is to help farmers launch and develop and also grow profitable product lines with a focus mainly on value-added products. And that can look like turning your crops into a product to sell or selling it in a way that will get you a higher return in the marketplace in those ways that Grace kind of specified earlier on. And since 2016, when Ellen started writing these grants, we've helped secure over $1.5 million in grant funding for small farms across 7 states. So we've gotten to see how the funding can help farmers get to the next level in terms of their operation and products. And getting to see that impact is what inspires us year after year to keep writing this grant for folks. Because like many of you probably already know, when you're a grower who's also producing a value-added product, it's like you have a second business. So having this kind of funding can be so impactful to be able to make some of those upfront investments that allow you to really operate more sustainably in a financial way, and also from just like having more time and the energy to continue to do this kind of thing year after year. Next slide, please. One of the things we really emphasize is that this grant is not just for a big farm that fits a very particular profile. It's suited for a wide variety of operations and products. So some of the people we've helped have made less than $10,000 in sales or over $1 million in sales. Some have been as early as in their second year of farming, to those who are operating multi-generational family farms, from selling through farmers markets and farm stands and CSAs to local stores, groceries, and as an ingredient to food service. Folks who are processing the products on their own farm and those who are working with co-packers. And then products that have ranged from crushed tomatoes to apple cider caramels to dried rose petals, grass-fed hot dogs, organic coleslaw mix, organic grapefruit, to herbal soaps and salves, and to sweet potato dog treats. So my next goal is to move into sharing some examples of some of the clients that we've worked with over the years. And like I said, this is hopefully to help you see how all the information that Grace presented translate into real life application, with the goal that you can think through your own eligibility, whether it's a good grant for your needs, and then how you might want to approach it. And I'm also going to make sure to identify why in each case we determined they were ready to apply for the grant the year that they did, when they did. And my goal in sharing that is to help you think through your own operation and readiness, because in some cases you might need to take a year to get things together to get yourself to a place where you're ready to apply, or you might just already be in that position and can jump in and get going. Because writing this grant is like a huge undertaking. It takes a lot of time and effort. You really want to make sure you're going to be able to present a strong enough application before you invest all of that time. All right, so our first example is Little Apple Treats. They're based in Sebastopol, California, and they had a nursery business and happened to move onto an organic heirloom apple orchard. And they decided they may as well start making something out of those apples. And they ended up turning them into apple cider. And then they used the apple cider to make caramels. And they're like seriously the most amazing and luscious caramels I've ever put in my mouth. It's delicious. When they came to us, they were selling in farmers markets. The products were selling really, really well there, and they had a good base of support. They also started to get into a few really local stores, but they were noticing that in the stores, the products were not really selling all that well as they were in the farmers markets. And this was the avenue that they were hoping to grow into. They wanted to do more stores, so as not to do more and more farmers markets, or maybe even to pull back on the farmers markets. So you can see in this picture on this slide, the packaging that they had when we started working on their application. And it was really great packaging for their farmers markets, where they were doing a lot of the job of selling the product. They're giving each person a spiel and giving out samples of the product, talking about the product, talking about their farm and the process. And then people were purchasing it and then coming back to buy more. But on a store shelf, the packaging wasn't really giving any information about the product or the farm. And in this picture, much like on a shelf, it's hard to see that these are actually 3 different flavors of caramel. The packaging isn't differentiating between the different flavors, so people in the stores are just buying one as opposed to a couple in different flavors. And the main reason, though, that they were using this packaging is because they were really convenient. They came in flat. They're 2 pieces, so the base would come flat and then they could assemble it and then slip on that top sleeve, which was what was customized for each flavor. And that allowed them to buy the bases in bulk to bring down their costs, and then they just needed to slip on the outer sleeve. And it was a great way to get packaging without a big budget. But what ended up happening is now all the cost, they're spending more cost on labor because of how much time it takes to assemble each base by hand. So the cost of packaging was great and it was low, but they ended up spending way more in labor. And their cost of goods was such that they were actually losing money on some sales of some products into wholesale. So they wanted to get new packaging so that they could actually scale and create more, while also having a solution that was going to help customers understand who they were and entice buyers to bring more than one flavor into their stores. Next slide, please. The main focus of their value-added producer grant was to change the packaging so that each flavor had its own complete separate design and color scheme. And you can see on this slide, there are 2 different flavors and they have different colors and they're recognizable as different flavors because of that. And what this ended up doing was enticing buyers to buy more than one because it looks beautiful on the shelf and to purchase multiple flavors. And it also ended up being more giftable. So while this type of packaging was always a no-brainer for them, before the VAPG, they just didn't have the budget to invest in a large enough run of packaging for each flavor, which many of you probably know, and maybe some of you also have this conundrum because when you order packaging, there are minimums. So their old way of doing it, they were able to meet those minimums with the bases where they had to order 3,000 in order to get a certain price per unit. But now with this new packaging, they're going to have to meet a 3,000 minimum for each of 5 different boxes because they have 5 different flavors. And that's a lot of money to put onto a first purchase of packaging. And so that money actually was able to come from the VAPG. And the reason for that was they paid for the design of the packaging separately. That was not included in the grant, but they were able to include the ordering and printing and shipping and purchasing of the actual package itself as an eligible expense. Some other things that was included in their budget were other ingredient costs because they put other things in. The focus of the grant was for their apples that they turned into cider, which they used for the caramels, but they also needed to purchase things like toasted almonds and rose petals. They also used they used the budget to purchase the layout and printing of their sell sheets and for product photography. Next slide. One of the things that Joanne said was that the USDA value-added packaging grant that Ellen got for us was critical in improving our branding, leading to a huge jump in sales and the ability to be picked up by larger accounts such as Eataly, Oliver's, and Buy Right Markets. And now to address that piece of why was this project ready, that I promised you I would, and I know you've been waiting on tenterhooks. So number one, they had the infrastructure. They already had the kitchen to make the product. They'd already been making it there. They also had their processed food registration, and that's a California state requirement to make this type of product. They also had baseline sales we could use to build out sales projections throughout the course of the grant. And in the application, that's one of the requirements is to include customer and sales projections. And if you have baseline sales data already, that makes those projections easier to calculate, number one, and number two, more believable as feasible. Another reason they were ready was because even though when we asked what their cost of goods were, they didn't have an answer, but they did have the ability to pull those numbers. So we worked with them to identify what data we actually needed to calculate their cost of goods, and then walked through calculating them and figuring out what that cost of goods was. Another reason they were ready was because they met eligibility requirements. Specifically, one of the things was they were growing 100% of the apples that they were using for the cider that they turned into the caramels. And the value-added producer grant requirement is that you need to be growing at least 51%. So check, they were doing even more than that. So they had capacity. Even if they grew and needed to ultimately supplement, there was plenty of room for them to purchase other apples if they needed. Another eligibility was that both owners were involved in day-to-day operations, whether that was the actual labor of like in the fields and harvesting, or production and sales, or just decisions and some of the administrative things that come with the day-to-day operations. And then lastly, they had relationships with buyers already that they could get signed letters of support from. And there's a section in the application where you have to summarize and then attach the physical letter that somebody has signed, and you strengthen your application by getting more points according to how well your letters meet their requirements. Next slide, please. My next example is Oya Organic Farm down in Hollister. When they first came, they were making a few products through a cottage food permit on their farm and then selling them at farmers markets and in their CSA. And they wanted to grow this part of what they did because, like many people who have a CSA, they would have this issue where they'd have a great CSA membership in the spring and summer, and then in the fall, as variety in their fields dropped, so did their membership. And so then it was low in the winter, and in the spring, it was a lot of effort to get people back in. And each year, because retention wasn't super high, they'd have to find new people to fill in the spots, and then try to grow on top of that. And that, even though it was going pretty well, they wanted to get out of the loop they were stuck in, where they were losing people and then getting people back in and ultimately plateauing. So they saw the value-added producer grant as a way to use the seconds from their fields to make products that they could put into their winter CSA in order to keep their membership happy and engaged and subscribed throughout the winter. Next slide. And what we worked to include for their project was fees to put together their website, having this mailer that went out about the CSA, doing things on Instagram and Facebook, and then actually doing a CSA portal build out on their website so that they could manage their CSA more efficiently. And they also included the salary for a CSA manager. And then the other really big thing this grant enabled them to do was switch to a co-packer. They didn't really have the people and time on hand to make the products themselves, even though they were trying to make it work. And so through working on their COGS, we discovered that they could actually lower their costs and make more product by using a co-packer instead of making it themselves. And the grant was able to help with the cost of the co-packer fees and the product transportation from the co-packer to them. Next slide. So Marcia said that before working with Ellen to secure a value-added producer grant from the USDA, we had tomatoes rotting in the field. Every season, I would think about preserving them, but I didn't have the time to take on the work. And now that we have the grant, I'm making our value-added product line a reality and something we're proud of. So the reason that they were ready was, number one, even though they didn't already have a relationship, like a working contracted relationship with a co-packer, there was a co-packer in her area that was able to take on the work. And they had an established connection, even though they were not already under contract together. So the co-packer was able to provide a quote that was necessary for the budget and provide a letter of support. And just as a little side note, for a working capital grant, which this one was, both of our examples are working capital grants, you do need to have the ability already to make the product. And if you don't already have the necessary certification to make the product or know of a co-packer in your area, you most likely are in a position where you take this next year to figure out, like, who would I use, or how do I start working on getting my processed food registration, and then apply for it next year, because there's a section in the application called the feasibility section where they ask you to lay out your plan for how you'll do the product, what you have in order to do it, what you already have in place, all of that infrastructure, because they want to make sure that if they give you the money, you can actually spend it. And they don't want to take the chance on, they release the money to you in October, but then it turns out there's not a co-packer in your area, and it takes you a year or two if there's a delay to get your processed food registration. So they want there to be a guarantee that you're going to be able to use it as best as you can, account for it. Because of course things come up and things change, like co-packers who you had a plan with, they might move, or things change. And there is a little bit of room for it, but they want to see, like, from the get-go that when you're submitting the application, these things are in place. Another reason Oya was ready was that even though they were a diversified veggie farm growing like a variety of fruits and veggies, they just chose one to focus on for the grant. So she was able to say, we're going to turn the tomatoes into a product to sell, and we're going to use that to grow our CSA. And then knowing that any marketing that they do to promote the tomato product itself is also going to have an impact on the growth of the CSA overall. And so had she wanted to include other products and other crops, it would have muddled the arguments in the application and made for a lower score ultimately. So it was a hard choice to focus, because you want to brag about all of the really cool things you're doing. But for these kinds of applications, it is really important to be as simplified and focused to make for a stronger score. And then the last two things that made her eligible or that we determined she was ready, was that they already had data from multiple years of CSA membership that served as a baseline for their customer and sales projections. And then they'd also already been making the products themselves under the cottage food permit. So they had that data showing it was a product their customers already were buying and wanting, and would continue to do it if they continued to offer it. Next slide. So I'll just pretty quickly talk through the process that we take folks through when we work one-on-one to write their grant. It's also the same process that we teach people through the mentorship that we run, where we guide folks through writing the application themselves. But for the purpose of this webinar, it's specific to the things that we do and who's responsible in the one-on-one setting. So we start out with planning, and within that, our client transfers needed document and resources to us so that we can build a recommended strategy for growth. So a lot of this looks like data and records that we need in order to calculate your cost of goods, production quantities, sales projections, that sort of thing. And then we move into the collect phase, which you would think, aren't you collecting stuff from us in plan? Yes. But the difference here is that for plan, it's stuff we need to plan the arguments for the grant, and for the collect phase, it is specific to the things that we need to include as attachments to the application itself. So this looks like we provide customized template letters of commitment for our clients to send to parties, and then get them back signed and return them to us. And they also collect other necessary attachments. And then we brainstorm budget items and collect quotes. So then we can move into the third phase, which is budget, where we build a balanced budget based on the brainstorm, and propose a timeline for how all of that functions. Our clients have 3 to 5 days to review it, ask questions, request changes before we finalize it, and submit to the USDA for a pre-review. This is a really awesome thing that they do. Like, if we reach out to them early on, once the grant has been announced, we ask when is the deadline for when we can submit our budgets for pre-review. And the reviewers will let us know. And if we get it in by then, they'll review those budgets and flag anything that is concerning to them. So any of the questionable expenses that might be eligible or ineligible, we run by them, and it gives us a basis for, like, do we need to change this or provide some clarifying information so they understand exactly what this is to increase the chances of it being accepted. The next phase, on the next slide, please, is where we write. We write the complete draft application and then send it to our clients, who read it fully and give feedback. And usually you have 3 to 7 days, depending on timelines, and the application window. And then comes submit, and that's when we incorporate edits to the final application. We fill out all required forms and then deliver a folder electronically with all of the application and attachments, as well as a checklist, because our clients are expected to do the final read through and check off all of the application materials, to make sure that what they're signing off on is, like, they are aware of what they're signing off on, and then print it all out, assemble, and postmark by the deadline. And then we're there on call to help with any questions that come up. And there are always questions that come up in the last minutes. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Kaylee.
Thanks so much, Liz. That was
Yeah.
really helpful, direct examples and concepts pulled out for how and when and why those were competitive applications. We've had one question come in through the question and answer box, but I think I'm gonna go through this section here, and Liz, I think it's directed more towards you, so you can have a chance to take a look. So folks, thanks for being here today, and we've just shared a ton of different information about the VAGP program, and we're hoping that you're still interested. And I'm going to go over this section of the presentation now about CAFF's Value Added Producer Grant Scholarship Program. So in general, the USDA Value Added Producer Grant, it typically opens sometime in January, between January to the end of February each year. And then there's a 60 to 90 day window that applications have to be written during and then submitted by. As of today, the 2024 VAPG has not opened, and that's not surprising. We're keeping our ear out and eyes out for email notifications as soon as that happens. And hopefully it will happen over the next 8 weeks or so. So we have talked about the big USDA Value Added Producer Grant Program, and then ERCS, Ellen Rawley Creative and Strategy, and our collaboration with them for them to write these competitive VAPG proposals. So Ellen, Liz, their team, to write a proposal for one farm that costs $7,000, and CAFF's role in this is that we have a scholarship opportunity where growers can apply, and we select a certain number of growers each year where we pay $4,500 of that $7,000 cost of the application. And then the farmer is responsible for the remaining $2,500 of the application cost. So that's just important to note that CAFF is playing a significant part of the cost to write the application, but you, if you were selected, are expected to have $2,500 paid up front at the start of the collaboration with ERCS. So just flagging that. And in 2024, CAFF will fund one scholarship for a farmer, and they need to be based in California due to our funding stream and California focus with farmers. And then, okay, you've learned a little bit more. Getting $4,500 towards your VAPG application sounds enticing. Where do you see that scholarship I'm mentioning? I just dropped it into the chat. There's an online application form. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, but also gather the necessary information. So you're able to scroll through the whole application on that link and see it all from start to finish to have a sense of like, what are all the questions that you're asked to fill out. And then we have that open until January 20th. And then we've done this, will be our third year in a row. And each year we learn a lot from the written applications, but for the final decision on who is awarded, there's generally a short phone call where we discuss a couple follow-up questions with folks just to, make sure we have everything understood on our end to get a sense for who would have the most competitive application. And yeah, there's a set of criteria that folks are scored on, and you're notified via email about the status of your application for the CAFF scholarship program. Some tips for the CAFF scholarship application is that application reviewers assess the competitiveness and readiness of the project. So as Liz mentioned in her examples, really illustrating the readiness of your project and any kind of data you can share, any past beta testing you've done, things like that are important. And really have a clear and detailed project description. As Liz mentioned with Oya Organics, it's you want to maybe do a lot and have a lot of different commodities and different products, but really it's important to be really specific with the VAPG and really focus in on one or two commodities and 1 to 3 value-added products. And some amount of previous sales of the product are really important to show what your current market is and how you could grow that market, because this is about helping grow value-added sales for many applications. And then any kind of financial documentation like cost of goods and sales projections are really important. And then having strong project partners who would be willing to write letters of support. So those are important things to keep in mind, and one possible mention in the CAFF scholarship application. And then, we have a little table here, or a little kind of 2 columns on the next slide about the do's and don'ts for your application. So I mentioned this already. Do be specific. Do include the history of your farm creating VAPs on your farm or with a co-packer. Explain your how VAPs help you meet your business goals. Need to describe any existing infrastructure and food safety licenses, and then check your plans against eligible costs and things that would take away from a competitive application is including ineligible expenses, like some of those that were mentioned earlier in this presentation. Listing value-added products instead of describing them. Describing a product you are making without the necessary local, state, or federal regulations. So this particularly comes up with food safety permits, and those need to be in place. It needs to be a legally made product to apply for government funding. And don't be vague. It's really important to be as specific as possible. So what's the timeline for this today? So the scholarship actually opened January 5th and is open right now until January 20th. And then applications will be screened for eligibility between January 20th to the 31st. And then after the applications that meet the initial eligibility screening are determined, then they'll be screened additionally between February 5th to 9th for feasibility, kind of the next bar to make sure that there's not something we're missing. And you can expect, if your application is in the hopper still at that point, that between February 5th and 9th, we would be in contact to have those quick follow-up calls. And then we're anticipating that the applicant who wins the scholarship will be awarded by February 19th, and then start the work the next week, the week of February 23rd with ERCS. So that's the timeline, and this is all working ahead of the curve. We're hoping. We've tried to put intentionally in here some buffer for ourselves that hopefully, like next week, the USDA doesn't drop their value-added producer grant RFP, because that would really change this timeline. But based on historical context for what's happened, this should work. And everyone who's on this webinar, you know, we have your emails. We're going to follow up with these documents afterwards, and be in touch. So if you're looking for a little bit more to like dig into value-added products and like food safety requirements and things like that, CAFF previously put out a 3-part e-series, webinar series on this that I'll drop the link into the chat in a minute, that you can check out on our YouTube channel if you want to dig into like more specifics of all of this. And I'll turn it over to Liz to talk more about the mentorship.
Thanks. Yeah, we also offer a grant writing mentorship, where instead of where we work with you and suggest a strategy, we equip you with tools to write it yourself. And if you want to learn more information about that, we have a whole web page that I can put into the chat right now for the mentorship. And that comes with templates and a guidebook. We have a live portion that will start once they've announced the grant, but you can start and you can enroll for it at any time between now and then. We find people have requested we open it earlier so they can get a head start on looking at all of the materials and starting to dig in. And so that would be if you are more of a person who likes to do it yourself and dig into it yourself, and also if that's more within your budget, that's why we provide it, is for a wide variety of people. And then, like Haley said, this year, since CAFF has one scholarship, we also have a capacity to take on additional one-on-one clients this cycle. So if you know you want to work with us, and it would be nice to get the scholarship, but would have the means to anyway, even if you didn't, then email me at projects@ellenrawley.com, and we can talk through the details of what that would look like. And it's just important to note that that will not impact the scoring of your scholarship application at all. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Liz and Kaylee. Great job presenting on those details. We have had some questions come in, and so we'll take some time to answer those. If you have others, please add those to Q&A or to the chat. We have a poll with just 2 questions. One of them is multiple choice and the other is a short form. So we're going to launch that just briefly while folks are getting their thoughts in order, submitting any questions. So if you can complete those questions, that would help us out a lot. We will be thinking about future value added product programming. So especially the short form question is very helpful to know what kind of information you all are looking for in the future from CAFF. Kaylee, are you able to launch that?
It looks like it's launched on my end, and at least one person has started to answer. Yeah, there's a few more answers coming in. Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like about 20% of people have answered, so maybe one more minute. Give it about 20 more seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just seeing a jump up and a number more people have answered. So just as people wrap up, you could probably keep going and then I'll end the poll in a few seconds.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start with the first question that came in from Jacob. Jacob's question is, for farmers that would like to begin growing or harvesting another product in addition to their main crop, could they apply for an emerging market application grant, or do they have to be actively growing and selling the product to qualify for a working capital grant? Liz, you're all things strategy when it comes to and eligibility when it comes to the grant. Do you have an answer for this one or need some more time?
Yeah, I think so. Generally, the emerging market application is for existing products to a new demographic or geographic area. So the answer is probably maybe, but probably not. If you have other similar products that you're already selling, or you've done like beta testing, and have like a couple of months of sales to show, you might still be able to apply for the working capital grant. But especially in California, where so many people are applying, it gets really competitive. So they want to see like existing products in the working capital grants.
And Liz, just as a clarification question, the emerging market application is for projects that are looking for the over $50,000, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that would have to come, that kind of project would have to come with a feasibility, marketing, or business plan.
Totally. Yes.
Okay. Jacob, let us know if you have any follow-up questions or comments to that. Another question came into the chat from Leslie. Leslie asks, if we don't have a processed food registration yet, should we take 2024 to apply for the registration and then apply for the VAPG in 2025? I think, Leslie, if you're making a product that requires a processed food registration, that process can take a while, and you do need to have that before you prepare your application. Unlikely that you would have that before, before this grant is due. So my recommendation would be to take that time. Liz, is that what you think as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. We do have some resources, Leslie, on the process to get a processed food registration on our website that we can drop in the chat. Maybe you already have seen those, but if not, they might be helpful in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then Teresa asks in the Q&A, there's some confusion about whether packaging was eligible or not. Is packaging an eligible expense?
So the packaging itself is eligible. Where it gets ineligible is if you're asking if you need to design the labels or the boxes, the design itself is not eligible, but when it comes to purchasing like the physical packaging, it is eligible.
All right. Thank you. Let us know if you have any questions about that, Teresa. And then Lauren asks, how much does the mentorship cost?
We have two different levels. So they both levels are giving you access to our resource dashboard. You get like a short 15-minute deep strategy session, as well as some group phone lecture-y type interaction and question and answer things. And all of the templates and resources for $1,050. And then if you want a little more one-on-one support with all of that plus 3 strategy sessions with Ellen, that's $1,800.
Is that price breakdown on the website?
Yes, and you
Okay.
can do 1 payment or 3, and that's also broken down on the website.
All right. That's all the questions that I see. So unless anyone has anything else, we can hold on here for another moment while I wrap things up. We will be look for an email from me for a recording of this webinar, and then an attachment of the PDF so you can access all the links that we've dropped in the chat throughout the webinar. You can feel free to email me. My email is just grace@caff.org with any questions. The scholarship application will be open through January 20th. And that is really just to make sure that folks have enough time to apply. But so I'll probably send out an email to remind folks of the deadline. You can also check our social media for some information on it. Thank you for being here. It looks like we have one more question come in. Leslie asks, could the grant be used to research and apply for the correct permits and registration? We haven't made a product yet. So that would be like maybe like what kind of food safety license or registration you need to get.
Yeah. I haven't heard of somebody doing that before, so I can email you. If you would, can you put your email direct to me, and then I will look into it for you and get an answer back via email.
I know too, Liz, like, I mean, there's just been some like information that I've seen out there that through the value added producer grant, there are some specific funds directed for food safety, but I don't think those funds have been made available yet.
Okay.
Do you know anything about that?
No, I haven't heard about that. That's the first time I've heard of it. That's exciting.
I mean, it's probably premature because they haven't come out with it yet. I don't know, Kaylee, if you know what I'm talking about, but I wonder if that's something that could be used for it. Anyway, it deserves more research. So we can get back to you, Leslie. And then Lauren asks, what are the chances of getting the grant if we work with ERCS? If there's not an answer for that, just okay, just curious. Do you have like a percentage of funded projects versus not?
Oh gosh. It is, oh gosh, I should just have the percentage off the top of my head. Of the ones we have written for folks, I think all but 3 or 4 were not funded. And then of those, we were able to rework one the next year, and it was funded the second time we submitted it. And then our mentorship also has like some pretty high funded rates for those who submit.
So the odds are in folks' favor.
Yeah. Yes.
But no guarantees.
No, we can't. I wish we could, but unfortunately. We can't.
Yeah, and I think, do you offer, Liz, like the clarity kind of thing? Like, I mean, my understanding of the process is like Ellen wants to write grant, or you and Ellen want to write grants that are really competitive. And so there's some advising that would go along with like, does it make sense to apply for it this year? I mean, that's part of what the scholarship process is too, of really making sure that projects are ready.
Definitely. Yeah. As the scholarship is just like a really formalized version of the conversations we have with folks before deciding if this is going to be a good fit for them. And if it would make for a strong application. So Ellen will always meet with clients to make sure that we have the information and it's going to make for a strong application before we enter into a contract and start writing it.
Okay. Great. Well, we've already had some folks hop off. So thanks everyone for your questions. Feel free, like I said, to email me and I can kind of direct your question if it's better fit for Liz or Ellen.